Hello,
Hello, and welcome to slightly delayed Philosophising.
my name is Ruby,
And I'm Nathan.
and sorry for the wait, but we are
Yeah,
here. We have a cool
yeah.
chatting topic today, actually. And the idea was actually Nathan. We were playing ping pong yesterday, and Nathan was like, "We should talk about ideas that really changed your brain and changed the way you think about things overall." And I was like, "That's a great topic. We can riff off of that pretty quickly." Um, yeah, and then I went home thinking about it a lot and actually came out with
hmm
like three different things. And I think you have a couple of things you want to
Oh,
talk
cool.
about too,
Yeah, I
right?
also came up with some things. Yeah.
Okay,
Um,
excellent.
Before we get into it, let me just check that the sound is working. Um, should be working. And I am also currently in Canada, is why my background is different. I'm not in the crazy Star Wars chair. Um,
And I am in my normal office, but not where I usually stream because
Wait,
I'm
so were
running
you
late.
initially planning to go home and then you went to the office? Was that what you were saying?
Yeah,
Or
it ended up being like the food place we went. So I went out to the speaker today, which was a really
Mhm.
fun talk. And I anticipated going home, but instead, I it was uh it was closer to come back to work.
Mhm.
So I did that instead. Let me.
Oh, your video just dropped off, I think. But
Oh no. Okay. Uh, what about now?
it's still off. Hang on, let me try. No, it's still off. All I see is R.
Oh,
Oh, there we
that's
go.
super weird.
Yeah.
Okay.
Um, yeah. Oh,
Ah,
hello, other people in your lab.
ah.
But yeah, it looks like the
Oops.
audio is working well.
Okay, audio's
So,
working. Okay,
uh-huh.
very good.
Yeah, anyway, so what were some of the things you were thinking about?
Oh, okay. I was asking my partner about this, and he said to talk about how we played board games actually. And the first
Ah,
thing was turn economy, and it actually really did change the way I performed in board games when I talked about when he basically told me to think about the opportunity cost of moves. So we were playing a lot of strategy games where it was like collecting resources and then like basically using your resources to do moves or do things to collect points.
uh-huh.
And I would spend a lot of time like building up an engine so that I could like
Mhm.
really efficiently do that, right? Like collect more points, get more characters, get whatever, play higher cards. But he was just like, think about turn economy, like how many times it takes you, how many turns it takes you to basically build your engine, and how much like cost, the opportunity cost you're taking by building your engine, and then calculate that all the way to the end, like count how many turns it takes you to build this engine and then how many times you get to use your engine, and then compare that to the other options where you're building from the bottom up, where you're not counting um like like just doing the little moves, but a lot of times, like sometimes the
Uh-huh.
turn economy of doing like a silly like repeat copy paste move, but like it's actually more efficient than building up a really clever
And
engine and building it out. Yeah.
so it's like so the opportunity costs of doing these moves, essentially.
Yeah, basically, and
Mhm.
then when you turn that and you apply that same way of thinking towards every game that you play, you think it's a lot more efficient to get to the required amount of points to win the game, basically, because like you're both like, unless the game is unending and forever, usually it's built in to have an ending, right? So so like
Mhm.
it's designed for you to reach a goal, like first one to get to this many points, first one to like recover all the, you know, the characters, or like fulfill all the requirements of the game. At the end of the day, it's a number of, if you can get there faster or if you can get there with more points, it really matters if you count turns.
Mhm.
And it actually makes a lot of sense if you ever studied like econ and thought about like trade and like why trade is beneficial for both parties. Like it's kind of like, do I sit here and grind, or do I
Uh-huh.
trade and use that time, the opportunity cost of like if you trade, instead of grinding, you do some other thing more efficiently, and then you give it back, and then the cost is lower for everyone, and everyone actually gained something more, right?
Mhm.
Like it's just
It is
like thinking about
interesting,
it.
like,
Yeah.
okay, when you're thinking about like the opportunity cost aspect of this, it does also kind of remind me of like it seems like it also has something to do with like this question about like, okay, why in economics do people not, for example, like make long-term investments all the time, and like what is the because of the opportunity cost of that?
Yeah,
I
because
guess
if your money is sat in like a long term, like long mutual funds or whatever, you currently can't use that same amount of money to do, buy low, sell high stuff like really
yeah.
quickly, right? Like you
Mhm.
can't do that if your money is sat in the long term thing. But
Right.
if you calculate, if you know how long you're gonna live exactly, and do you know what I mean? Like if you know the end of the game, then you could calculate which one is actually better for you personally, and
Mhm.
you could decide.
Also, FFG293 says, "Hi folks, what happened to Nadira?" Nadira is still kind of involved with the stream, but she doesn't go live with it currently, because she is starting a new job and didn't want to put her face online, basically. But um, but yeah, she's around. We talked to her. We didn't
Yeah,
like have
and she's
a
alive.
horrific falling out or anything. But yeah, okay, going back to the turn economy thing, I'm curious, like, okay, so there's this opportunity cost aspect, but then, like, how does that relate to it being like in turns versus, I guess, kind of continuous? Like, is that the other way that it could be?
In terms of it,
Like,
like,
I
can
guess
you
I'm
phrase the
I'm
question differently?
interesting. Like, I'm just interested because you described this as like a turn-based economy, and so I guess I'm curious about how does the aspect of it being turn-based figure into this? Like, is this just because that's kind of the unit? There's a unit of time, or
Yeah, it's a unit of yeah, it's always a unit of time. So in real life,
Mhm.
it is opportunity cost time.
Mhm. I
In
see.
board game, it's like a turn, right? Usually
I see.
in
Yeah.
many games, it's like you take a turn, I take a turn, you take a turn, or like you go around taking turns, and everyone has equal number of turns, but you're trying to get the most out of your number of turns, right?
Right.
So
Uh-huh.
if I am more efficient with my turns, um, like it's better, right? So
Uh-huh.
that's how you do well in the game. It's by being more efficient with your turns. And it's overall, right? More efficient with turns overall, not just getting like, one really good combo out. It's more like how like getting that cool combo out is great. You get a really big card, you get really big points, but like actually overall total of the game, like it took you 4 turns to get that combo out, and then someone else over here could do 4 turns of grinding, and if that 4 turns of grinding is more points total than you doing that big combo, that wasn't worth it, right? But
Mhm.
if you can
Yeah.
use your
And it's just like
combo and double it twice and it actually builds, then it could be worth it. And then like it helps you calculate the end of the game faster. Like it helps you
right.
premonition the course of the possible courses. And so it's kind of like you can apply it to real life too, right? You can apply it
Mhm.
to how you do make financial decisions. You can pile it onto currently I am on a diet, so I can use it for calculating, hey, do I want to eat that now, but that uses up this many calories, and then like feel hungry later, right? I'm constantly thinking that kind of calculation now, and it kind of changed the way like I flip, instead of just being like I feel hungry, I'm just gonna do that. That card looks cool, I'm just gonna play it, it's big.
Mhm.
I'm actually spending a lot more time thinking about, hey, like what is the cost of doing this,
Yeah.
like what is the alternative of, do you know what I mean? Like
That's interesting.
it
Yeah.
really changes the way you think.
And you feel like that's helpful in daily life?
In some cases it does, like, yeah,
I
it is
see. Yeah.
mentally taxing though, it does use
Yeah.
energy.
I guess that's what I was gonna like, kind of what I was thinking about when you were talking about. It's like, okay, there's this idea in behavioral psychology of like, why do we not just do that by default? And I think the kind of the consensus idea is maybe just because like it uses a lot of energy. It
Yeah.
just is very compute intensive, and kind of we've evolved to be more kind of compute miserly. Actually, I think that is the term. It's called cognitive miserliness. It's like we don't want to exert like cognitive energy unless we really need to.
I was gonna say the other word for it is just lazy, mental
Yeah.
laziness. Like we
Yeah,
like
and it's
shortcuts,
like
right, for a
cognitive
reason, right?
laziness,
Yeah.
which I also think is a really interesting concept because it's like, okay, physical laziness kind of makes sense. It's like whenever you're moving, you consume energy and like that. I mean, that actually is something that has an opportunity cost too. With thinking, I think that it's like it's not entirely clear what resources you're consuming when you're thinking. It doesn't seem like the brain, like when you think really hard, uses a lot of energy in the same way a muscle does. So and so this is kind of, I think, still sort of an unsolved problem. It's like, okay, when we're talking about why are people cognitively lazy?
Okay, now that I think about it in that way. So if
Hmm.
I was going for the least energy intensive plan, it would
Hmm.
to do you know what I mean you could just always go the grind method because you don't really have to think that hard, right? Like it is the easiest way.
Hmm.
If the analogy is my diet, it would just be eating the same food for
Uh-huh.
5 days in a
Yeah,
row,
yeah,
the
yeah.
exact same breakfast, lunch, and dinners, like weighed out,
Hmm.
pre-prepped, and just eat the exact same thing. Like don't think about the snacks, don't think of the alternatives, because if you just eat this meal, you will get the health benefits, which was the original goal, right? So
Right. Yeah.
like you would lose the pleasure of possibly eating a snack that was available sporadically. You would lose the pleasure of feeling like you gamed the system well. Like I stayed under my like calorie um goal, and yet I got to eat something sweet and tasty and all I had to give up was like half a potato and like one third of this
Uh-huh.
lunch, right? Like do you know what I mean? Like
Just half a
you
potato. Yeah. Uh-huh.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I suppose that's okay, right? That's what works
Mhm.
for you. Like both ways you would hit your calorie count.
Uh-huh. But you think
um
that, like, if you have the cognitive effort to spare, kind of you get advantages from being able to take these opportunity costs into account.
Yeah, and you get to possibly taste something very tasty that was someone brought in from like for like or there was like free ice cream today at like
Mhm.
at the snack bar and you're like, "Oh man, I really want that." Okay, if I want that, what does it mean I give up? Um yeah, it is cognitively there's a higher cognitive load. I could also just say no to any extra food that wasn't like pre-planned. Um
Mhm.
but yeah, like it applies to a lot of things in life, right? Like it applies to that. It applies to time spent doing enjoyable things at
Uh-huh.
work. It's like I could do all this work now, or I could like do some rest and spread it out. I could do you know what I mean? Like there's always these
Right. Yeah.
opportunity costly things that we're computing constantly. And like really thinking about it structurally, like in the context of a game actually like broke I don't know, like, it cleaned the way I think about like you have 24
Right.
hours in a day. 9 hours of this you need to be sleeping and like brushing your teeth and stuff. And then like 2 hours of this is just eating. And okay, how many hours do you have left? How many hours are you awake and like alert and can be functional and like thinking? How many of these hours are you doing important things, less important things? How many of it is like scrolling on your phone? Um, like it really changes your I don't know, the way you like structure your day. I know it's
So
really
in
ironic
in
because I ran
teaching
in late
you to
today.
get better at, like, resource management in your game, your partner, like, changed how you think about
Yeah, and
everything.
we
Uh-huh.
were talking about how plasticity literally changes your brain. Like this,
Like brain
lit-
plasticity.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Like he literally changed my brain because I do so many. I compute things differently just because I think about that.
Because you've, like, practiced this skill in the context of the game. Yeah.
Yeah, and I
Oh,
practice
that's
it
cool. Yeah.
all the time now, and it's like a fairly simple everyday thing that basically he used like the method of transference was he said some words at me, I computed it, and then now I play
And now you
board
do it.
games different too. Yeah. So
Mhm.
basically he was on a winning streak. We were playing Wingspan, like this bird game where you like try to get the most bird points, and he was beating me by a lot. And like repetitively, like 8 games in a row. And then after he told me to think differently about this, like basically consider how many turns your turn economy basically and your opportunity costs, I went from losing like 8 games in a row to basically we are at par now. I then I followed it by winning the next 10 games, and then now we're at a 50-50 split. And we've stopped playing the game because we played it like hundreds of times, and like we're basically at par. And I think the big difference was him just saying the words like, "Hey, like you should consider what the opportunity costs are when you're setting up the game." And I was like, "Oh, whoa."
And then
Um
just like, okay, yeah, yeah.
yeah, and I think he was better at this because he was playing other video games. And so, for example, he plays this video game where there's like 10 players on each side, and then like they have different kinds of ways to battle each other. And he was just like, the usual, before he like figured out a way to like beat the game readily, he said that he would have powers from some of his characters that would spread out the damage across like all 10 of the opponents. But he says actually that power is not as strong, because if you can concentrate, like, and every character gets a turn, right? So like 10 characters on this side, 10 characters on the side. So it's like character one goes, character one goes, character two goes, character two goes. And he says that if you can concentrate all of your powers on killing off like a single character on the opposite team, they actually lose a whole turn, not just once, but they lose that turn. Like if they had 9 against 10, like every time they go all the way around, they only get 9 turns and you get 10 turns. So that's an extra turn every time they do the full battle, like 1 through 5, right? And so he
Mhm.
was just like, yeah, like, so when you consider that as part of your strategy, when you're developing your strategy, like maybe you should pick off a single character on the opposite team first. And do you know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like instead
Yeah,
of
and now you apply
spreading,
this to food.
yeah.
Um,
And now I apply it to my diet,
mhm.
which is coming
Makes
along
sense,
slowly.
yeah.
But yeah, changes my mind, right? Like it's
It
isn't it
is,
cool?
yeah. It is interesting because, like, I feel like when it comes to nutrition, I have a very different approach, which is really like I try and do like the exact same thing every time. I'm just like, okay, I will eat Soylent between the hours of like 2 p.m. and 9 p.m. and and try and like kind of minimize the cognitive effort of it. But
um but like yeah, that's what is
mhm.
least, I guess, like most comforting for you, like
Yeah.
mentally comforting.
Mhm. Yep.
um
And I also think for me, like minimizing the cognitive effort also makes me more likely to actually do it too.
yeah.
Like, yeah. Speaking
um
of cognition, um, I wanted to mention, so one of the ideas that changed my mind that I was thinking about was actually this. So when I was first starting to take like cognitive neuroscience classes in college, we watched these videos about this thing called change blindness, and I'll actually put it in the chat. It is pretty crazy. So um, people would do these experiments where, for example, you would have someone go up to someone at a counter and they would ask for directions to a place, or they would ask the person to do something and the person would bend down behind the counter, and then a different person who is hiding behind the counter would pop up and continue the conversation. And actually, like about 80% of the time this random person they were talking to didn't notice. um they just kind of seemed to just not really think anything was wrong, even though it was clearly a very different person. And I think it was really interesting. I think the thing that I noticed when I was watching these videos or when we were talking about that, I'm just like, that can't possibly be right. um like, how could this happen so frequently? That just doesn't make any sense. And then, like, what I realized, like, when I thought more about it, is like, okay, well, this probably happens all the time when you are um like when you're just in your everyday life and you don't notice it because by definition you can't notice it. And this really, I think that actually, like, the change that it had for me is that it really made me much more skeptical of things that I perceive. Because if you take this research at face value, it is saying that our perceptions and memories, there's this whole other thing called false memory, but it's like it is often wrong, and it's often in ways that we have no idea that there are these distortions happening. And I think it really I think it really is fundamentally like a different way of thinking about our perceptions because we have this idea that like, oh, you can believe things that you see and that you remember. And I think that is actually a lot of the time not true.
Like, you could be really confidently wrong all the
Uh-huh.
time.
Yeah,
Okay,
like
so I actually have a really good story about change
mhm,
blindness. So in high school, I learned about change blindness in my psych class as well.
uh-huh,
And then I like turned around. I was also taking statistics, like AP stats in
mhm,
like high school. And they were like, go do an experiment and then like plot it and like do p-value stuff. And I was just like, great, I'm going to study change blindness in San Francisco. And I literally during Christmas season did that exact experiment. So it was like me and my friend Karina, and so I would like walk up to a random stranger with like a map of San Francisco, like in Union Square, and be like, "Hey, where's the Fisherman's Wharf?" And then uh my friend would bustle across with a giant shopping bags, like Christmas bags, and then I would duck away and continue with the shopping bags. And then she would be stuck there, like, asking for directions to Fisherman's Wharf. And we like did it to like 50 people, and
mhm.
every single one, like, we would
Really?
tell
So
them
you
afterwards, every
replicated the
single
effects.
we
Yeah.
replicated it like so spectacularly that when we told people that we had done that, they didn't believe us. We were like,
Uh-huh.
yeah,
Yeah.
we are not the same people. Like, I had my hair different, like I had it up in a ponytail. Karina had
Uh-huh.
her hair down. I was wearing a green Christmas sweater and she was wearing a red Christmas sweater. Like, we were wearing completely different Christmas themed clothing. So like, it was shocking. Like, it blew my
Right.
mind because we did it like a social experiment. Like, we did it ourselves. Um,
And
like,
like honestly, if I was gonna like at that point, like I mean I did kind of wonder, I was like, well, is it just that people are too polite to call out what is going on here? But like it seems like they're not. Like it seems like as far as we can tell, people genuinely like don't notice.
yeah, so like I guess like we finished it because we felt like it was kind of unethical to like dupe a bunch of randos. We were like afterwards, like after they gave us like detailed directions to Fisherman Wharf, like I would come back and be like, "Thank you so much, you were part of my experiment."
Oh nice,
And then
yeah.
I was just like, "Did you notice that we were two different people?" And then they would like look at us like back and forth and to feel like,
And
"What?"
then they're like, huh.
Yeah. I mean, on the other hand, maybe they just recognize two different Asian girls from each other, but
Uh-huh.
like, we were in different
But like you
clothes.
made it very easy for them to tell the difference, like different
Yeah, like
clothing.
in our
Like
minds, like it blew my mind, which means like no one could remember, like people could just forget you quite
yeah,
easily.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
And so kind of the cognitive science explanation for this I should mention is that like um a lot of it has to do with attention and the fact that kind of we really are only attending to a small part of a scene at a time and that's really the only part that we can actually encode into memory too. And the rest of the scene, like when we encode the memory, is like mostly just kind of made from extrapolation. So the reason that we think that the change blindness happens is because if you're talking to someone, you're asking for directions to Fisherman's Wharf, you're probably kind of actually mostly paying attention to like what are the directions, and your
yeah,
brain just kind of makes the assumption that these things that you weren't observing or that weren't attending to, like who is the person, are staying constant.
that's true. Yeah, they were probably like trying to figure out which direction the train was going, like
Mhm.
where, like they were trying to figure out how to get us to a different location. They weren't paying attention. I
Yeah,
think
I
the
guess
other
I mean, I
one,
think to me the fascinating thing is just that we have so much confidence about it. Like it's not like that people say, "Oh, I don't know who I was talking to because I was thinking about the directions." They say like, "What? No, you were definitely the same person."
yeah,
And
yeah.
I think that's the part that I find freaky is that like potentially so much of the things that you think that you have seen and remember could just be wrong. And I
We could
guess
just
if
completely miss it, right? Like,
yeah, and I guess, like, I mean, one of the things that these experiments suggest is that probably everyone has, like, a significant amount of memories of stuff that didn't actually happen.
yeah.
Um,
Um, like I think the one that really convinced me for this change blindness thing was, have you seen
Mhm.
the video clip where they ask you to count how many bounces in the
Where they
basketball?
count the passing the ball.
Yeah, count
Uh-huh.
how many times this ball was passed in like this video. And like before, like if you haven't seen it, you should see that, pause this video or
Mhm.
like pause us, go watch the video first. But like then they'll tell you, hey, like you should attend to, did you see anything weird besides bouncing balls? And most people would say no, right? Like they would not have
Mhm.
seen, usually like some rando go in, do a dance, wear a costumed
Don't
gorilla.
spoilers.
Yeah, like most people wouldn't see that unless they attended, right? Like,
Mhm.
um, I that's how fallible we are. And actually, that actually is one of my other things I put on my list of things
Oh,
that changed
really?
my
Uh-huh.
minds. Yeah, so in college, I took a class called like women studies
Mhm.
and like how it applies to science. And it talked about objectivity. Like we spent a lot of time defining what objectivity was and like how difficult it was to be objective, and then how actually, however hard we try, we can never be truly objective. Like it is a unattainable goal, but the actual process of attempting it and looking at all the variables that are making us not fully objective is the closest thing we can do to being like as objective as possible.
Hmm.
That
Mhm.
really changed how I interpret data, like science data, behavioral data. like I'm really cognizant of like if I go into an experiment with the hypotheses, that like if I look for the answer and I expect this answer, I might see it. Do you know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
there's wishful
Versus
thinking.
versus before when you were doing it, you were kind of assuming that you would just be objectively seeing what is there and not seeing what isn't there.
Yeah, like cuz I was just like I'm a scientist, right? Like I just
Mhm.
look at things and I describe it. But actually just the act of looking. Do you know what I mean? Like the act of
Mhm.
testing, you go in with a bias, right? You go in thinking it could be this or it could be this, but you always pick a side even if you're like
Yeah.
I'm truly
And
just
which
the
like
exploratory thing. And just that process of being picking a side or just having a gut feeling either way just makes you
Mhm.
not objective. Like there's
Yeah.
no way. Like
And even just like what questions do you ask, right?
correct.
Um,
Just
yeah.
the act of asking a question no longer makes you fully objective anymore. And I was just
Yeah.
like sat there in this women's studies class and I'm like, what? What what happened? We're
Yeah.
screwed. Like we can never be truly objective. What is the point of this? Um
But, like, you can get better, right? And then
correct.
like, you maybe can't be, completely objective, but you can definitely be, like, more objective than you
Yeah.
were.
Yeah, and like
Yeah.
it really like stresses the importance of certain parts of science. So like double blinding yourself, for example. Like I
Mhm.
frequently do all my behavior experiments double blinded. Like I'll score them here, I'll put it in an envelope, tape it on the wall, and it's like I could easily not do that and still get the same results, but I would not believe the results that came out of it because I wasn't blinded when
Mhm.
I did. Do you know what I mean? Like to truly believe it, I blinded myself. Like I'll ask
Right,
someone
yeah.
to be like, "Hey, can you
Mhm.
swap this a bunch of times?" and then like write it down on this sheet of paper. I'll put it in an envelope and I'll figure it out once I'm scoring the data. But
Yeah.
like, or
Yeah,
once I
I
finish
I
scoring
was
it,
doing an
right?
experiment like that too, like, we were trying to test out this device, and basically, like, I had my student just, like, put different types of powder in the different pouches, and then we, like, tried it on ourselves, and
Yeah, like
yeah. Yeah.
you really need it to believe it yourself. And it's
Uh-huh.
kind of like it's like adjusting your personal BS meter, and
Mhm.
it changes the way you think, right? Like if we believe we can truly never be perfectly objective, then everything, like we have to do the exercise of being like we're not truly objective, so what can I do to combat it?
Right.
And even if I do combat it, what else could it possibly be besides what we think it is? It's really important,
Yeah,
and
it's
it changes
interesting
the way
because
you
it's
think.
it's
Yeah,
also like it's also like in a way what you're saying is basically like objectivity is not like this trait that you have, but it's like a set of skills that you practice, even if you
correct.
don't like it doesn't doesn't make you totally completely objective. But objectivity is like a skill that you can be better or worse at.
Yeah, exactly. And I was just like, whoa, I learned it in like a liberal arts class
Uh-huh.
in college. I got for like credit. I took this class
Yeah.
just for credit. And I was just like, whoa, I walked out of this class. I think a better scientist for it, right? Like, and that
Mhm.
was before I
Yeah.
was even a scientist, like a full scientist. I was like
Mhm.
an undergrad, and it changes the way I
And you're
think.
just like, whoa. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's stuck. It's
Yeah.
like one of those lessons that stick with you. Like that was one of
Mhm.
the lessons that stuck with me, and to this day, like it
Yeah.
genuinely altered. Like when I say we altered the way we think, it literally alters our brains, right? Like it
Uh-huh.
alters.
Yeah.
Like
Mhm.
that's what we actually mean. The substrate is like the changes in our
And,
brain,
like,
right?
it's stuff that, like, alters, like, how you just think about the world in general too.
Yeah.
Yep. I was gonna say, I think also, like, that stuff, I mean, I think it applies to everything, but especially kind of, like, sociology and stuff. I think I was yeah, I was reading a paper actually about how, like, different drugs, affect sexual motivation, and like when you give people different hormones, like how does it affect sexual motivation? And like I think one of the things I was like reading thinking about while reading this is like, how do you even measure that? Like, do you measure like the number of partners someone has? I mean, that depends, like, not on them. Like, do you measure like the rate of sexual fantasies? Like, and it's interesting because it's like you have to pick something. You like actually in this paper I was reading, it seemed like the authors really had a lot of kind of unspoken assumptions about the way they chose to measure this. And I was like, that is definitely going to influence the results you get, even though it is past that it's like an objective study.
Yeah. And actually this is like kind of a tangent is actually
Mhm,
one of the major I think should be the major um like proponent or like evidence for why we should have diversity in science. We should
mhm,
have people from different backgrounds because their version of objective and their viewpoints actually change, right? And you need people from
right.
different backgrounds. You need people that are from really socially economically stable places, people from socially economically unstable places. We need people from all kinds of cultures, and like norms, like societal norms for them needs to be different. It's really good to have a mix because then you are less likely to miss the gorilla that just walked through the
Right.
do you know what I mean? Because some people are like they count by looking at the hand, some people count by looking at the bounces in the ball. Do you know what I mean? Like you
Mhm,
need diversity in thinking, and it helps if their objectivity and like their abilities to build those skills came from different places, like they all learned it
mhm.
differently. And um sorry, that was a complete
Yeah.
tangent, but
No, no,
it is one of
it's
the
like,
things where I feel very strongly like
mhm.
we really should be, nurturing scientists from like all places, all kinds of
Yeah.
backgrounds.
Because, like, then you have, like, okay, 3 different people, and, like, they'll all be like, "How do we measure this?" And they'll all be like, "Well, obviously, you should measure it like that." And then you can think about, like, "Wait, what does it mean that you all came up with different answers?"
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, because it's like these person were trained this way, right? So then they're
yeah.
like their mentors trained them this way, so they think like this. And say these people were trained this way, their mentors thought like that. So they had kind of like a lineage of thinking a little bit. And sometimes it's really helpful just being that mishmash where you get in between input from both, and there's like a magic kismet moment where you make discoveries, and it's just because you just had the right people in the room, right?
Uh-huh.
I love that. I like the idea. It's just like beautiful, like, oh, this is why you're in science again, right? Like
Mhm. Yeah.
um
Speaking, I guess,
cool.
of, like, science pathologies, I guess, like, things that go wrong in scientific reasoning, I wanted to there was another one that I was thinking about, which I think is really interesting um that, um people almost never talk about, and what I realized is, like, that people don't even really understand very much, which is regression to the mean.
Oh yeah.
Um, yeah, and, like, so I guess, like, and we were actually talking about this while hiking, but I think it is a really fascinating statistical principle, and actually when I learned about it, it changed just kind of how I thought about things a lot. So I guess, like, one one thing that I think is like um kind of the way that the fallacy of it works is like, okay, let's say you have a headache, and then you tend to get headaches a lot, and every time you take you have a headache, you take this headache medication, and then like within 30 minutes the headache goes away. So should you conclude that the headache medicine works? Um, and I think like intuitively you would say yes, but the interesting thing is that like you have to also think about like, okay, and this is how it's presented to me, is like, when do you take the headache medicine? It tends to be at the times where you are unusually in pain. And so therefore, because headaches have like a limited duration, like when you take the headache medicine, it is almost guaranteed that like at some point soon after you take it, the headache will go away, even if the medicine didn't actually do anything. um and this is basically like one of the cases of regression to the mean. So what regression to the mean says, that is, it says actually if you take two measurements of anything, um, or even more than two measurements, and your participants or plants or whatever you're measuring, the ones that are very high at your first measurement will always be lower at your second measurement. And similarly, the ones that are very low at your second measurement will always be higher at your all right, sorry, the ones that are very low at your first measurement will always be up higher at your second measurement, even if you're not doing any intervention. Like even if nothing is actually changing, this will happen. And like the reason is essentially it's just based on random luck. So it is that to get if you happen to get a high score on your test, whether that's like size of plants or how good your memory is or whatever, there's always an element of just like random luck in there. And the people or plants or animals that score high at your first test, most of them scored high in part because they just kind of got lucky. They just had their score got inflated by random luck. And statistically speaking, that is probably not going to happen twice. There's a very low probability that happens twice. So therefore, when you take your second measurement, if you're looking at anything that scored particularly high or particularly low, you're going to see it go back more towards the mean level, which is why it's called regression to the mean. And I think the fascinating thing about this is that like people, even scientists, don't really talk about this very much. And I've worked with scientists and I've like read papers and I've seen things where they said like, oh, we looked at people's attitudes and we found that like people who were very hostile to using AI at time point one became a lot less hostile at like the second time point. So therefore, they kind of warmed up to it. And like you actually, and then you point out to them, you're like, okay, actually, maybe their attitude didn't change at all. Like this could all be just explained by this statistical artifact, and it's very little talked about, despite the fact that I think it kind of it's really like it shows up whenever we try and measure anything, which I
Yeah,
think
I
is
was gonna say,
that's really fascinating.
is this phenomenon only work if you sample very few times? Because theoretically, if you sample a lot of times, it would just become Poisson or like Gaussian, right? Eventually, you will just get a bell curve like every time you sample. If you sampled enough times, you would get like I'm just thinking about like scores. Like let's say
Mhm.
they took an aptitude test, like maths or whatever.
Yeah.
Like it obviously if you picked out the extremes, right? You do a couple
Mhm.
samples and you take the the highest scoring one. Obviously, the next one you're gonna pick out is gonna be lower than the highest one, right? Like
Yeah.
eventually,
Yeah.
if you keep sampling, so it's like a underpowered sampling error,
Mhm.
kind of, right?
Right. I guess like I mean I would say it's not it's a little bit like that, but I guess I would say that like so that's sort of a different problem. So it's like okay, one problem is just like if you take only one sample, you're going to have a lot of contribution from random noise. Is kind of what you're saying. And if you take more samples, you're going to get better at estimating. For example, if we were looking at like the someone's memory ability, like the more items you test them on, like
Yeah.
the closer like the better your estimate you're going to have and the closer it's going to look to kind of maybe this like Poisson distribution.
Yeah.
But what the regression the mean really is about is like what happens when you're doing comparisons that are conditional on a measurement that you took before. So if even if I sample people, like even if I test people on 1,000 different memory questions, like the people if I give them 1,000 question memory test, and then I give them another 1,000 question memory test the next day, my measurements are going to be pretty precise on both days. But if I take the people who did in the top 50% on the first day, even on this like 1,000 question memory test, and
Yeah.
then I look at their performance on the second day, I'll still see a statistically significant drop in performance.
Got it. So like your top performers on the first day will
Yeah,
likely be less top than the first day because of the
right.
probabilistic probability of getting, the perfect score, like the highest possible score.
Right, exactly. Because it's like so another way to like think about it is, or another way to articulate it is like whenever you are selecting conditional on how they scored,
Mhm.
like there is always a contribution of random chance depending on like regardless
Got
of how
it.
many samples you took. Um and so
So
this regression to the mean, it's really a problem when you're kind of trying to stratify things. So when you're trying to say like, okay, what happens to the top performers on test one versus the bottom performers? It's
got it.
actually I keep mentioning memory stuff, and the reason, I mean, it's a huge problem in fields like that because like we actually know like memory performance does drop over time, and there's theoretical reasons why, for example, like people who did a good job at learning something might have different forgetting curves than people who like didn't learn it very well initially. But the interesting thing is like when you look at these and when you look at people did like running these experiments, it's often very confounded with this regression to the mean effect.
Yeah. Now I'm thinking
Yeah.
about how, like, oh, I just lost my train of thought. But actually, I think the the way we take tests. So
Hmm.
let's say it's a multiple choice test. So no matter what, you could just, let's say it's four answers, A, B, C, or D. You get
Hmm.
25% chance, right?
Yeah.
So that regression of the mean, like when you're designing your experiment, like if it's multiple choice, you need to make sure that your window of what you're calling, the ultimate perfect score people needs to
Mhm.
be less less than, no, more than the probability of a quarter chance, right? Because the quarter
Right.
chance is what bumps you above, basically like 25% is the chance, is the total possible chance. So like let's say on that day they were 100%, like out of,
Hmm.
like they rolled, you know a quarter of the times they were just really super lucky.
Yeah.
So you have to like choose your window size of what you're calling your perfect performers to be larger to basically collect, the
Yeah.
lowest probability rolls and highest probability rolls over time. Does that make sense?
I think so, yeah. I mean, I would say that like even that doesn't totally solve the problem because it's like people's like you can also think of it as like, okay, you're doing a test and you're trying to really estimate what is this person's kind of overall kind of average performance if you did the test on any day. But you're
Yeah.
getting one sample. And it's like people can by luck just be unusually smart that day too. And
Mm.
like that actually contributes to the regression to the mean effect too. Like the people, or to put it another way, like the people who are scoring in the bottom test, the bottom part of the test, the bottom part of their scores on test one, not only are they maybe unlucky in guessing, like there's going to be a higher portion of them that are hungover and sleep deprived, but then they're probably not going to be hungover when you test them again.
Yeah.
So even if you're like, so we can't really mathematically say like, okay, this is a difference that's so large it can't be explained by regression to the mean because this kind of luck impacts all these different things. What we
Yeah.
can do, and this is the cool thing, this is why I think it is an idea, it's something that really changed how I think about things generally, is this explains why we need control groups for a lot of stuff. Because that is how you see that your intervention is doing something that isn't explained by regression to the mean. Is like if I want to look at the effects of the drug, say I measure people twice before and after I give them the drug, but then the question is like, okay, was that effect just the regression to the mean? Did people like is it the case where people were in a lot of pain so they took a medication and then their pain dropped, was that because of the drug, or is that just because pain tends to drop over time? And the answer is you have a control group that you do the same two tests, same two time. You select them the same way. So you're doing the tests when they're experiencing pain, but you gave them a placebo instead of the real drug. And therefore, you can actually measure how much of that change was due to regression to the mean. And so this really explains the placebo effect, and it really explains a lot of why we need control groups in studies.
I was just sat
Yeah.
here thinking about how this totally either makes sports really more fun and more like it's in the moment and live, or less exciting because it means that like if you did the Olympics and then like 1 week later did the Olympics all over again with the same athletes, it's
Like
not
the
gonna
ones
be
who
the
were
same.
good would be bad, and the ones, well, actually, just like everyone would on average be mediocre is really what this principle would say.
And like the person that like really like locked in that day probably not going to lock in again for like Olympics
Yep.
part 2,
Yeah.
and like you might not get them again. Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah. Which I
that's
feel like is also how sports betting works. Like that's why sports betting companies can make money off of sports betting, is because these aren't really like permanent characteristics of the people. They're just kind of weighted random things happening.
yeah. Oof.
Uh,
Yeah, I don't know if that helped or hurt like sports.
yeah.
Like
But it's
it's like
I think okay, at minimum I think it is interesting that it explains all these different things and that no one has heard about it.
yeah.
Um
Oh no,
yeah.
that like I remember you explaining this to me in the context of
Uh-huh.
like high scoring like maths exams, and
Uh-huh.
that's when it really clicked to me. I think we were like heading to Bodeborg or something, and my brain
I
was
think we
like,
were
"Oh,
hiking, and then I was
yeah."
explaining regression to the mean to you
And
and
I was sat
Kyle.
there and I was like, "How do I not know this?" Like, and
Uh-huh.
very good. That's such a
And
good one.
that's the crazy thing is there's so many people who like do experiments that like it is a big like that it impacts and they don't know about it. But yeah.
Controls, double
Uh-huh.
blind,
And
when
it's like interesting.
possible.
It's like, okay, I mean I do think it's good that people know like, oh yeah, you have to have a placebo group. But I think the why that is, I think is really interesting too.
Yeah.
Um,
It's good that like we kind of have it built in. Like most people
mhm.
realize that you need to
Yeah.
compare to a
Yeah,
control group, that
yeah.
like that's very important and like it's built in. But it's
Yeah.
nice to like refresh why it's so important to do
Mhm.
the controls. Fascinating. Yeah. When did you learn this? In college?
I think I definitely didn't learn in college actually. I was I think I just read some papers about it in grad school.
No. I feel like the cool like the basically today's topic was just like what thing did you learn sometime during your
Uh-huh.
career that's just like really stuck with you, and then like just paradigm shift the way you think, right? Like that was kind of the idea. And that one definitely would change the way
Uh-huh. Yeah.
for the better too. I guess my last one, or my last one I wrote about is actually kind of simple, and it doesn't sound that paradigm shifting, but so like we kind of learned about evolution like in school a really long time ago. It's just like, oh, like we found a bunch of dinosaurs, like here is a explained. Like, and you kind of like learned evolution like that kind of offhand. It's like, oh yeah,
Right.
science.
You're like,
But
okay, things evolved into other things. They acquire mutations. Like that's why life looks the way it does. Okay. Yeah.
yeah, you kind of like learn that and you're like, okay, cool, makes sense, everything makes sense. But like I think later in college when I was taking like developmental bio or comparative anatomy, and then we were looking at homology, like you know the fin of a whale has like 5 digits and like it looks like a hand basically, and then you have like homology like a bat, like it was like a photo like a figure. It was like a
Mhm.
bat's wings, a human's hand, and like a whale's flipper. And
Mhm.
it was just like, yeah, these are all mammals, like they're they have homology and like body bits. And then it was like really clicking that you could basically use like theory of evolution in all biological sciences, to just explain and give logic to all of it. And you could use it to make hypotheses about things all the way down to like how proteins fold. You could be like, hey, like this protein or like this like molecule is an ancestor of this molecule, so they have like these many sites, and at some point it acquired a couple more of these sites, and therefore, do you know what I mean? Like you can follow it.
Right. So you're saying that kind of by understanding evolution, you can understand like, okay, why does this protein have these things that are kind of seemingly
Like useless.
nonsensical?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like,
Uh-huh.
why are these? So, like, we learned about like vestigial organs, right? Like, for
Mhm,
humans, like, why do we have appendixes? And like, do you mean like you learn
mhm,
tailbones? Like, why do we have that? That's not useful. But like, if you follow through like theory of evolution, you'll be like, hey, like our ancestors, when we were like chimp humans, our ancestors, shared ancestors, probably before that some other like mammal with a tail, it was a useful appendage back then for
mhm.
survival, and those they survived, they reproduced, and then they made our, that's a common ancestor we have. They had a tail. Cool. It makes, you can literally follow it, it just like makes logical like sense. And then like
Mhm.
it also makes sense when you look at, I mean, fossils that exist in any museum. You can think about basically everything. You could place it in the context of evolution, and it's just literally like this thing randomly existed. It had a random chance of reproducing. If it did it well, then it continued the line, and if it didn't, it randomly accrued mutations. The ones that had the mutations might also have a possible chance of reproducing well, and then that was, that was just what's kept. And it could be some weird random thing and side effect, but it didn't, hurt them from getting, didn't hurt the reproduction abilities of the creature. It just kept it.
Mhm.
And it just keeps going. um like you can think about it like in sensory neuroscience. So you're like, what, why
Mhm.
do like turtles have like four versions of this cone? And
Mhm.
you're like, yeah,
Yeah.
they just had a mutation that just kept it. And I was like, why do we have so few cones? And I was like, well, we just lost it, and like somewhere back then, and we continued reproducing, and it was fine. We didn't need that many to
Yeah.
survive.
I
And
think And I think like the even crazier examples are like when people like, and there's like academic work on this, right? Like using applying evolutionary theory even to like non-biological things, where people say like um like the concept of memetics actually before the internet, right, was actually talking about like, can we model ideas as these things that evolve by, they reproduce because people tell them to each other people, and they kind of get mutated or changed in the process because people sometimes don't really understand them, and thinking about that as like a mechanism that generates culture. I'm like, I think
like
that's, it's kind of,
telephone game, right?
yeah, yeah, like but it's fascinating to think about like, okay, like I, because like I feel like whenever I learn about evolution, it's always like we like it's always in the context of a biological system, but like really like like it seems like it is actually like this kind of fundamental property of the universe too, that shows up anytime something can replicate itself with some errors.
Yep. um and it's kind of the beauty of it. It's like
Hmm.
messy, but like the strength is that it gets messy in different ways, right? Like
Yeah.
every generation is a lottery roll, and you get a different combo of pop hope maybes.
Uh-huh.
Right?
Yep.
It's kind of cool, and it's like we're not exactly our parents, but we're not them either. So it's just like we're just some combo, a combo row. And like, good luck. Like, let's see what the next generation brings. I
Have
don't
you read about like evolutionary algorithms much, or?
know. No, not really, but
Oh yeah.
like tell
So
me more.
that's another crazy thing that you can do with this, is that so you can use this principle even to solve like computational problems.
Yeah.
So there, so for actually, so NASA has used it a lot for designing antennas. so antennas are quite difficult to design manually because the math is very complicated, and we actually don't fully like we don't have good solutions to some parts of it. So on some space probes, what they basically did was um, they had a computer design a random antenna, and then they simulated how good is it at picking up radio signals, and actually they designed like a couple dozen random antennas. They simulated all of them. They picked the one that was the best at picking up the radio signals, and then they mutated it a little bit. They did the same thing again, and they
Ah.
eventually got a really weird looking but also really good antenna.
Oh, okay,
I'll
that's
put
kind
it
of
in the
cool.
chat.
No, that's really
Um,
cool. I mean, it is not new for scientists to like
mhm,
basically copy biology and
yeah.
technology. Like we'll copy like I forget I was reading about I think we talked about this one time. Remember how like geckos like grip onto
Mhm,
things? They were like creating like materials that were similar to their the static or like whatever
mhm.
technology they made that was really similar to
Right. Uh-huh.
animals. They use it for creating torpedoes and stuff or things that go
Mhm.
through water quickly. They'll make them penguin and dolphin shaped because it just has least drag.
It's just that's
Um,
the space that works, or
yeah,
the
yeah,
design that works. Yeah.
that's the shape that works because
Uh-huh.
it's gone through many generations, right? Every
Yeah.
animal and creature and being that's currently alive on this planet right now, which currently is a bit like dying off, but every creature is at its peak.
Mhm.
And do you know what I mean? We are at the like it is generally like if they survived, they are peaking, right? Like we are
Mhm.
peaking. I guess it means they will go down. Like I guess they'll go down when they die off. But like we currently all exist at the same time, which means we have all spent, you
Like
know,
everything kind of is at its optimal fitness at this point. Yeah.
yeah,
Um,
or at least optimal enough for this environment currently.
mhm. Yeah. I mean, I guess like I feel like you can say it's optimal because it's like okay, or I guess I would say like the most common thing. Actually, I don't know if you could say like, would you say the most common thing is the optimal fitness? I guess not necessarily because there could be something that's like in the process of replacing it, but just hasn't like
Yeah,
bred enough
or
yet.
yeah, or the environment is changing so quickly, like we can't
Mhm.
like it works at a specific time scale, right? Like
Yeah.
you need to have enough like so if you have a constantly changing environment then you need to evolve quickly, and we see
Mhm.
that so like organisms that live in like little pools of water that where the temperature changes very quickly like will have generations in like hours, right? Like they will have they can't reproduce quick enough to like adapt to the environment, we've seen that like I mean they tend to be very small organisms or like
Mhm.
they don't tend to be organisms that live very long, but that is their strategy, right? Like they'll adapt quickly to like quickly changing environments and deal with it. And if they don't, they'll die off, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
That is the I guess like the brutal reality of it. Um yeah, it also like makes you think a little bit about how I don't know. There's like recently there's a bunch of news about how they brought back this like dire wolf or whatever,
Uh-huh.
and I was just like, you didn't bring back a dire wolf. You like mutated a couple of dire wolf genes back into a current wolf, like to
Right.
have some
That's
of
what
the
I was reading
features.
is so like they took some dire wolf genes, they isolated and they just put them in a normal wolf.
Yeah, I mean
Mhm.
it's great splashy title, and I think it's good science. It's just I feel like the media blew it out of proportion or like are concentrating on the wrong part. I was like, why are they doing this? Like why is it important to do that we can do these kinds of things? They completely missed the point, I think.
Mhm.
um but yeah, like that we're not countering evolution like that's not going to solve our like changing our planet so quickly that all our animals are dying off and like that is the
Right.
answer is
Uh-huh.
not plugging in some genes into a currently alive animal. Like that is not the answer to
Right.
like climate change.
Although it is like it's interesting because like I feel like even in like the original Jurassic Park, like if you read the book, that is actually what they did. They like kind of take a bunch of genes from like frogs and stuff and try and like make something that looks kind of like a dinosaur because in the book they don't actually have like all the dinosaur sequence. And like it's kind of interesting that Michael Crichton like anticipated that that's what would people would do. But yeah, it's definitely not the same as like saying we
Yes.
actually made this thing.
Yeah. And the Jurassic Park, I think in the story, like, it was in the blood of a mosquito or something. Like they had enough DNA. That DNA, I think I did the back of an envelope calculation at some point. Like that DNA would have degraded ages ago.
Yeah.
It
No,
would never
okay.
have made it.
So I was reading a fan theory actually, which is basically the fan theory is actually that like Jurassic Park was a scam. Like that basically they were doing the same thing that these people are doing with the dire wolves, which is just they do genetic engineering to make an animal that looks like what they think dinosaurs should look like. And
Yeah.
that explains like okay, you can't actually get the DNA from the amber. You can't get mosquitoes that have fed on just like one particular dinosaur. Like they're pretending like they're doing that, but they're not. They're just kind of like making things look like dinosaurs.
Yeah.
Um,
Probably
it's like
like an
that makes sense. Yeah.
aggressively mutated ostrich and emu.
Uh huh. Yeah.
Like
Uh
would
huh.
probably look like one of those
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
dinosaurs.
And I mean, like, I mean, that is the fact that we are basically now doing that, and this company is making knockoff dire wolves. I feel like substantiates this theory.
Uh yeah. Maybe we will live to see, a park full of mutated ostriches that look like dinos. Like raptors
Welcome
and
to
shit.
Mutant Ostrich Park. Do 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 do
Do,
do.
do, 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 do. Um,
Uh,
yeah.
yep. Um, let's see. I think we're at time, but if
Oh,
there
we
was
are.
anything else you
Yeah.
wanted to do do do
Yeah.
do do do
I mean,
do.
I wanted to end with
Mm-hmm.
like just thinking about how plastic, like what it means that our brains are like plastic. Like it means,
Neuroplasticity, yeah.
yeah, no, it literally just means that we come out half baked.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're born half baked so that we could be changed. Like our
Mm-hmm.
minds are designed to be changed, and it really depends on the environment you are in and like what information goes in, like what kind of ideas you're exposed to. Like that literally changes your brain. Your brain is changed after listening to us. If you
Yeah.
were paying attention, I guess. Like I guess it wouldn't matter if you were like just sleeping and we were talking at you. But like if we have like transferred
Actually, as a sleep
information.
memory researcher, like it would.
Okay,
But
that works as well. But
yeah.
yeah, like just by listening to us talk and just by me and Nathan talking to each other, we are changing each other's brains. And like
Mhm.
you can kind of talk about, it's like you're someone is at, like, through the internet and the webs, we can change how your brain is wired. That's pretty
Uh-huh.
wild, right? Like that's
It
kind of
really
cool.
is, and I think to me it's fascinating because I feel like it really contradicts kind of the assumptions that people have about it. It's like um like it seems like people have this idea that for example like if you do something and it changes your brain chemistry it changes your brain structure like that is more dramatic than something that just changes what's going on mentally and like it turns out it's the same thing like anytime you're exposed to an idea it is changing your brain structure and I that just seems so I feel like it really clashes with this kind of like dualism that people implicitly have.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, like some things were like, oh, this is definitely changing our brain for the better. But sometimes I'm like sat there scrolling my phone and I'm like getting more depressed. And I'm like, is this changing my brain for the not better? Like, is it making me
Uh-huh.
more depressed? And I mean, it definitely is making me more depressed, but like, is like is that bad? Like
Mhm.
does it have long-term health effects that could affect me
Yeah. I mean, I
negatively?
guess that's the other part is I think like if I say something if I say like something damaged your brain, like people assume that is permanent. But like I think the other part of neuroplasticity is like it's really not permanent. Like if you're exposed to like intense stress, it's reasonable. It actually makes sense to say like that it will damage your hippocampus. We'll actually see that like the cells in the hippocampus will become physically less connected,
Yeah.
but like and actually some of them will probably die off. But then once the intense stress is over, like actually they will just reconnect and it will even grow more cells to replace the ones that were lost. It's one of the few brain regions that can do that. Um, and so I think like it's interesting. It's like we also have this cultural idea that physical change, brain changes are really significant and sort of permanent. And I think that's also not true.
Yeah, like
Like
I
you're
think
like when you say like, oh, is this really physically damaging something about the brain? I think like the answer like for most things that we do is like
probably.
yes, but also it can go back. Like
Yeah. And I feel like when you
yeah.
think about it in a medical sense, it like really solidifies it as like, oh yeah, this is actually a health issue. And I think about this like in the context of like let's say you're addicted to a particular drug.
Hmm.
Let's say caffeine.
Hmm.
Like, let's say you consume caffeine every single day. And then
Hmm.
like one day you don't consume caffeine and then you have like horrible withdrawal effects, right? Your
Hmm.
brain changed every time you drank coffee to the point where
Hmm.
it like was used to that many AMPA receptors. Like it was
Hmm.
used to having um like that amount of stimulus in this bloodstream. So when it was gone, you had these horrible like effects, like physiological effects that you like, you get the shakes or the
Hmm.
sweats or you have headaches, whatever.
Hmm.
Um but like if you stayed off the caffeine for a couple weeks, you will you will cease feeling these horrible side effects. It's going to be rough, but your
Right.
brain
Uh-huh.
can change back to before you
Uh-huh.
ever consumed
Mhm.
the caffeine, right? Like that's how
Right.
fast it
Uh-huh.
takes. You can literally
Mhm.
see, like you can track your physiological effects. Like, do you still have a headache anymore? Do you still feel shakes or whatever? And eventually it's going to equal out. Like during that time, your brain is changing, right?
Yep.
That's
Uh-huh.
cool. Like that's how fast we can change. That is plasticity, right? Like
Uh-huh.
that time it took to recover from your caffeine addiction or whatever addiction you're on, it's neuroplasticity. Like that
Mhm.
counts. That counts
Yep.
as
Uh-huh.
neuroplasticity. Um yeah, and I'm pretty sure you can be addicted to caffeine at any point in time of your life.
Yeah.
Like even when you're like in your 70s or 80s and you're old, you could probably still get addicted to caffeine and get unaddicted to caffeine again,
Yeah.
which means into your old age you still have the capability of
Yeah.
being
I'm
quite
curious
plastic, right?
like so when you think about the term brain damage, like does that imply like does like to be so for something to be brain damage, do you think like it has to involve cells being dead? Does it have to be something that's permanent? Or would you say like if someone is like addicted to caffeine, do they have temporary brain damage? Like
Oh, I wouldn't call it damage. Yeah, I think for
mhm,
me, when you say damage, I think like concussed and like dead cells,
mhm.
like dementia, like or some like some kinds of
But I
cell
feel like
death.
a concussion usually doesn't really kill the cells either, right? Like it's usually like it I mean, arguably it's like kind of a disconnection type injury where just the axons aren't working efficiently.
Yeah, or you could like basically have these micro like tears in the capillaries, and then like the cells near it get less oxygen and they die.
Mhm.
Like I
Yeah.
think that's the long term damage is like actual like cells. There's less, you know less neurons that are happy and
Mhm.
doing their thing. But that's true. Like when you are in withdrawal, the neurons are not happy and not doing what they're normally doing.
Mhm. Yeah,
Right.
they're clearly dysfunctional. Maybe
Yeah,
like
maybe we should use
there's this
dysfunctional is a better word.
uh-huh.
Or maybe this is a semantic thing, right? Like it's just
Yeah.
um but yeah, like I guess that's not an idea. That's more like straight up drugs that could change how you think, and how how plastic our brains are.
Yeah. I will
Uh,
say I have a friend who went to a meditation retreat. It was actually the first time she did it was like the week before I met her, and she came back and she was like, I feel awful. And like so she went to this like silent meditation retreat, and she actually came back with like a lot of what seemed like basically like post concussion symptoms. Like she was super sensitive to light and sound and had like a lot of brain fog. And like she did not get a concussion or hit her head at all, but like she was doing this intense silent meditation routine.
ah.
Apparently something that happens to some people is they kind of get these symptoms, and I think that's crazy because it was all behavioral, but that happens. And I think actually there's positive things that are similar too that happen. I think the most well studied is mindfulness meditation. We're just learning to focus your attention. Actually trying causes all these kind of structural and functional changes in the brain that are usually seem to be good.
I was
um
gonna say I think she was sensory deprived, because
oh
that's
yeah, she was like
so one of the arguments for like why we have REM sleep actually is
mhm,
that it basically is keeping, so like in your cortex, your brain, like
mhm,
one of the theories is that like it's like real estate. Like this
mhm,
part is for vision, this part is for auditory, this part is for touch, whatever. And so when you're sleeping, you're not looking at stuff. So
mhm.
that part of the cortex kind of loses its significance.
It's
And
input,
so
yeah.
yeah, so it could get like invaded by like other parts.
Yeah.
And so if you don't have REM sleep where you're dreaming and like moving your eyeballs and like looking at stuff, it might lose its real estate while you're sleeping, because you sleep like 8 to 9 hours a day, which is like a
Mhm,
significant portion of your day. And that'll be bad. Like imagine if you like went to bed and then like the
mhm.
plasticity was like you didn't use your
Right,
vision, you don't need it
like and
anymore.
then you went blind because like
Because like, do you know what I mean? That could happen.
yeah.
Um,
Uh-huh.
and so one of the one of the possibilities, for like, us making shit up and like hallucinating and like having these horrible symptoms, is that our brain is making it up so that
Mhm.
it could fight for its space,
Right,
so
so
it
it's like
doesn't
it's
lose it.
kind of stimulating visual input so that those neurons remain specialized in processing visual input and don't like
Correct.
decide to do something else and cause you to go blind.
Yeah, and that's why it's really horrible, like whenever there's like sensory deprivation, like punishments in jail
Mhm,
or whatever, in like incarcerated, like no sounds, no vision,
mhm.
like no like anything. People start self-stimming and like making noises and stuff just so that like they don't.
Get some input.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's quite normal for them to just like sit there and start slamming things and screaming and doing things. And that's literally because like that's just you should expect that. That's actually what should happen, because they're just their brain is maintaining the fight. At least that's the hypothesis, right? And I think the meditation one like was a sensory deprivation like retreat where she like wasn't hearing anything, wasn't like seeing anything. Do you know what I mean? Like just like sat there not doing anything. It must be like quite a shock. Definitely did something to her brain. Wild.
Yeah, yeah, and but yeah, so brain plasticity is crazy. Like,
Yeah, it's
yeah.
crazy. We're way less baked
Mhm.
than I think we are, and
Yeah,
we change a lot and a lot quicker. Like,
and like, yeah, like when you read about the mechanisms of it, I think it's super cool too. Like it turns out, it turns out that um, we need like one of the reasons like that we have so much brain plasticity in our visual system is because there's no really good anatomical way for all the cells to actually know like where they are in the visual field. Like there's a very coarse system, but it doesn't have the precision that it needs to form these like incredibly high resolution images that our eyes take. The way that we figure out like what visual cells are next to each other is that we look at things and then the brain just looks at what is correlated with what. And then by getting visual input over time, it can build a map of exactly where each photoreceptor is. And that is how we learn to actually make a visual image, like how to interpret this light coming in as an image.
Yep.
Very
good. I think with that, we're definitely over time.
Yeah, thanks so much for listening. This was fun.
Yeah, this was definitely fun. Good topic.
And
Good
then
picnic.
next week we're talking about neurodiversity.
Yeah, we are. We were talking about neurodiversity, and I thought it was like a we'll might bring in a guest to talk about it.
Yeah. So I'm excited. Yep.
Yeah.
All right.
See you
Well,
next
we
week.
will see you next week. Yeah.